Hey Collective, it's Al, and this video is going to be accompanying my latest piece on LinkedIn, which actually surrounds the topic of the collective consciousness and why I keep referencing it. I had received a question recently about my continual use of the term collective consciousness, when most people are familiar with Carl Jung's particular theory on the collective unconsciousness. A theory that basically focuses on the idea that it is our unconscious states of understanding and of being that most manifest the world around us, including our insecurities, our fears, and any type of trigger points that we have along our own life journey. And so what happened was that when that theory originally came out, what I wanted to focus on with this piece was how the moment that it was identified as an actual possibility, that it started to move into an evolutionary stance of rising and ascending into the forefront of our mind, effectively bringing about the collective consciousness. And one of the things that came about from that is the fields of theology, of philosophy, of psychology, all that focus on the unknown and the power behind what it means to bring something that is in the shadows out into the light, where everyone as a peer group can look at it and learn and grow and prosper. And so in the moment that he even identified the term, the collective unconsciousness, we started to see as a collective a very interesting avenue by which to grow, which was that the more of us that began focusing our attention on that possibility, the more it began to help us evolve as a species into a state of awareness, where through those fields we study why humans behave the way that they do and talk about an evolutionary jump, right? Because from that, we started to become aware of our trigger points and kind of taking more responsibility about the world that we create around us and the reality that we're manifesting in our day-to-day lives. And so one of the things that I wanted to really focus on with the video was that I wanted to get into a little bit more in-depth analysis of where I was coming from with that in a way that would be rewarding for the intelligentsia and the collective consciousness and so forth, the readers that I have or the viewers, because I felt like there was so much area to kind of explore within this understanding. Because when we think about a collective, what we're actually identifying is a group of people that believe or adhere to a certain state of being, policy, or religion, or scientific community. You start banding together in the ways that you think, and whether it's on a conscious level or on a subconscious level, right? Like we've seen video documentaries on Netflix and so forth about how sometimes you can use a fear trigger and bombard the person that is afraid of something with nothing but stimuli surrounding that in order to get them to do something, or where you find somebody's algorithm that is specifically interested in something, and AI or whatever the programming is will immediately start bringing you more of the content that you're interested in. Well, it's basically the same thing with a collective, right? A collective is a group of peers, right? And in business, we refer to it as groupthink, right? Group thinking, where a group of people focus on a specific area of interest and they then grow together, whether it be in that field itself or somehow the byproduct of what they're looking at or what they're researching or what they're trying to resolve. And marketing is an incredible example of how that kind of works, right? Because as we know, once you put something into the Google search engine or any search engine you're using, that collective algorithm then starts bringing you content that is affiliated with them that they believe will bring the most merit and more growth for you. But the thing that's happening now as we evolve as a species is we're starting to question the motivation behind who programs the algorithms and who's the people studying us and so forth. Because we all know that once we like something, sorry, there's a hair in my mouth, that once we like something, let's say that we are prone to liking a specific kind of beer or a specific kind of thing, then we suddenly find our algorithm and our content related to those areas of special interest, right? So in an unconscious state, that can be kind of a danger zone, right? Because we start to feel, I should say, as we're being manipulated into doing things, because our brain and our soul become cognizant that there is some sort of motivation that's hidden behind why we're suddenly getting all of this particular stuff, right? But with a collective, what we're focused on with the collective consciousness is a group of people that are brought together to solve bigger problems, world problems, hunger problems, financial issues, and so forth. But that are doing it through altruistic reasons, right? One of the reasons I named my YouTube channel Altruistic Channel was because I feel incredibly altruistic. But in the piece that I was writing for LinkedIn, one of the interesting points that came about is when you start to become cognizant of yourself and you take more responsibility for your choices and you start to actually remove certain media outlets from your environment in order to better center your energies and find the truth of who you are, you start to then have to look at the world through a different lens by which you start to explore other people who seem to be heading in the same direction you are. But the issue is, everyone always thinks that they're doing right by people, right? Well, most people. Like maybe 1% of the population is actually downright evil. But the 99% of the population feels like they're always doing something because they're doing it for their own right reasons. And the question is, well, how do you find right relations with another group of people that somehow is simpatico with where you're going and what your truth is? Because what can happen is, because people always think that they're doing right by everyone else because that's their understanding of their reality, where they are in the evolutionary ladder, you can sometimes get involved in things that may not be for your best being and may not be for the best outcome for you, or that you feel is a justifiable cause by which you can stand behind it because you are trying to live in light or live in grace. Sometimes what can happen is you're already in the group and then you find out that there are hateful things that they say, or they spread intolerances about specific groups of people. And so you find yourself already involved in something where you've been kind of feeding into the issue itself. So how do we as a collective now take the collective consciousness into a direction that is better aligned with the evolution and the upliftment of us all? And so that was a very interesting point, because truth is a very subjective thing, as many of us have come to discover through the advent of the internet and all sorts of things in books and so forth. You can always find justification for whatever you're believing at the moment, but where we really don't have a lot of growth is in the allowance of others to have their own beliefs, even if it challenges yours, and not to be bothered by the fact that other people think differently than you do. So how do you find the collectives that are more neutral, right, without being passive, right? You don't want to be part of something necessarily on a collective level where you feel like everybody just kind of goes with the flow consistently. That's a very great spiritual, evolutionary thing. But the truth of that is it takes a lot of process and a lot of progress, and it takes a lot of like introversion and like a lot of self-healing in order to be able to do that on a long-term scale. But that doesn't mean you become a doormat, or it doesn't make you any less able to stand on the mountain for yourself and to stand for something and have integrity and have all of the things that you need. So how do you then balance those things and finding other partnerships and groups and people that are like-minded but that aren't doormats and that aren't so left or so right that they alienate all of the main population, which is searching for truth and searching for some sort of better understanding as to why we're here, what we're doing, and all of that. So the collective unconsciousness has now evolved like a wave into a collective conscious state, where through the fields of our shadow nature, where they study theology, again, religion, all of those things, when they try to solve problems that are unseen, you have to be very careful and be very wise as to who you align yourself with. So the challenge now becomes, now that we've identified why I use the word collective consciousness, whose collective are we more prone to be interested in working with or to be a part of, right? Because what we're finding is, like with Carl Jung, it started with an idea. It was an observational thing that he saw many moons ago that he brought to the forefront of the collective. And at the time, probably didn't get the best reception because it was unknown. And a lot of times when you bring something to the field of science or anything like that, it's usually like a lot of people are more naysayers and try to break it apart. And that's really good to some degree, but sometimes it can be a lot more of heat coming at you than is probably necessary. But the point was that it started in his head, an idea that he brought forth in word that the collective then looked at, and a group of people slowly started to build interest around it. And it created a great deal of momentum that helped the species now be in a much better stance of understanding why it's so important for us to be aware and cognizant of our own triggers. Because then we're able to then see other people's triggers, and we're better able to identify and to deal with them in a way that is much more empowering for the person who is self-aware, right? Notice that I always stay away from the term woke, because I find it to be a very demeaning term to something that's very spiritual, which is, basically the great awakening, which was that Jesus said that you must not be in slumber upon his return. And so I always find it really disrespectful when people say woke, because they're saying it in a way to be really like lower vibrational. But with the great awakening, part of it is just consciousness. It's just being aware of the world around you and your part and how you fit into the spokes of the wheel that's turning. So with that, what I wanted to really focus on was all of the different ways that we don't really always pay attention to, that we're being kind of coerced or manipulated. And one of the greatest means to do that is, have you ever noticed during elections when politicians are running on a specific hate campaign or intolerance campaign, that they bombard the demographic with nothing but information related to that in order to trigger them consistently into voting in alliance with them? Have you ever noticed that? Like, it's not a sweeping generalization. It's just something that we all have seen done many, many times. And left and right both do it, right? But one of the things that we've noticed is the more cognizant you become of that type of manipulation, the less likely you are to fall for it, and the more in the middle you find yourself. Meaning, not middle like you're passive and, that you can't stand for yourself, but rather that you think always on your feet and you're always constantly aware of the motivations of others. Not because you're judging them, but because you identify within yourself what it is that you see in them. For example, someone like me who's incredibly loving and compassionate can identify really quickly hatred within another person because it's the opposite end of the spectrum. So instead of me looking at the person from the lens of triggering them in the hateful way, finding a way to either not deal with them specifically or to find a way to bring compassion and understanding to where the fear and motivation is coming from is usually a much better stance by which to be, right? And it helps break down the house of Babel that we seem to be existing in, which is basically a bunch of people all working towards the same outcomes, but who speak completely different languages, different vernacular. Scientists say one thing, they were talking about the collective unconsciousness, and then Jesus was talking about the slumbering state, and spiritualists now call that the awakening, and then some people use it derogatorily as woke. But see how everyone is talking about the same thing, just from different daggers, right? And so the thing that you need to find is a group of people, a collective that you really, really believe in, that also believes in you and what you're bringing to the table so as to then do something that creates a mass amount of change. Again, ideas are what sets everything in motion, and Carl Jung did that very well. And we have all of these amazing masters and elders, if you will, that have come before us, who have left the bread trails to help us evolve as a species in a way that's much more unitive. And that's super important because what we're finding in this 3D experience now, with the advent of those chips and stuff that are going to be helping us walk again if we can't walk, and all of this other stuff that we're doing with neuroscience and things like that are to help the species, we're also being fear triggered into realizing, well, but can someone then program us against our will to do things that we don't want to do just because we want to be able to flip our remote control or not have to worry about remote control at all and just flip through the channels of a station with the chip, right? Like, that's an actual conversation that's just starting. I think it's a little fear response, but it is what it is. It's actually happening. So while a lot of the population is unaware of the AI development and all of the unsupervision behind that and all of that stuff, there are a lot of other things that are starting to appear as clusters of questions that we as a peer group have. And so as you look at your world around you, and if you are aware of those concerns, then start focusing your energy on other people who have those concerns and then observe them quietly for a while to see what their true motivations are. Because it'll help you better understand what you're stepping into, and it'll help empower you to know that you're joining the right collective, right? Because a collective consciousness, blankly stated, following Carl Jung's theory, is the entire population's groupthink, right? It's where is their mind going? Is it all materialistic? Are they driven by greed, ignorance, whatever it is? If that's where the majority of the population is going, then that's usually what manifests in the world around us. But in smaller groupings, like with spiritual groups or humanitarian efforts or saving the planet and all that stuff, those collectives are breaking off and doing incredible work to bring solutions to world problems in a way that is non-biased, that includes people, and that brings people towards one another. And it breaks down the barriers that we need to remove in order to start really, really understanding that we're all trying to work towards the same progress, right? So with these collectives, what I would suggest to everybody is to take a moment to really look at how marketing works, and then to take a moment to really study media and how corruptive the narrative can sometimes be, and then to also focus on patterning. It's one of the great things that I learned along my journey that I would highly suggest for most of you who are starting to become aware of the collective consciousness and kind of the power behind us is understand patterning. For example, every now and then the news media will latch on to one particular story, even though there's much bigger stories around them that they won't focus on because of power, because of corruptive power, right? People with a lot of money, somehow they disappear from the fray, and then something that's minor or social becomes the focal of every channel. Well, that's a form of manipulation, isn't it? Because if you have an independent media outlet, then shouldn't you be doing independent work and not be following that particular patterning? And so there's videos and stuff that you can find for yourself of how literally the narrative across all these independent channels have literally been saying the exact same copy. They've been reading the exact same thing, and they've actually put them together. But that's a whole other thing. I'll let you guys research that. That's neither here nor there for me. but I'm saying there's information like that out there. So be aware of media manipulation and kind of understanding that there are certain double standards that exist that we need to be cognizant of in order to better understand the narrative by and large, right? Because have you ever noticed that sometimes content comes to you that seems so left field, but it's exactly what you needed, but you hadn't really ever looked at it before, and you start to question the world around you as to, well, who exactly is controlling the algorithm and how exactly does that work, right? And I'm not going to get conspiracy theory on you, but how does that actually work and who programs it? Because the concern that some people have is, let's say that a mass media outlet somehow gets control of our likes and dislikes from, I don't know, I don't want to say Google because I don't think Google would ever do that, but whatever resource you're using on the internet, and somehow that data gets sold. Well, how do we know if they buy that company out if they don't then purposely try manipulating us in a very, very subconscious way? And so stuff like that starts to fester and it starts to bug us. But when that trigger happens, it's meant to make you react or act in a way that's in alliance with who you are and what your intention is for the world around you, right? That is kind of the evolutionary stance that all of us are here to kind of work through, which is how aware are we of our everyday actions? And how does those actions then influence the reality that we and the others directly around us experience? Do we get triggered all the time by fear? And if so, then why are we watching that particular source of information? Why aren't we removing ourselves from it long enough to really center our own energies and find our North Star and then follow that for ourselves? Because when you start to do that, you gain freedom. And that's a very interesting term, right? Because when we're talking about a collective consciousness, one of the fear responses that comes along the journey as you ascend is you start to ask yourself, well, if you join a collective consciousness, then how much of your thought process is your own? And so that then feeds back to what I just said about the media outlets and so forth. How much of what we believe is actually what we believe or just what we've been indoctrinated to believe? And that's a question that every one of us that's on the mountain needs to figure out for ourselves. Because for me, the big question I had when I was finally really going to focus on the collective consciousness was this. When you join a group of people, you start to adopt certain principles and things about each other. It's a natural thing that you start to sync up. And in that syncing up, one of the things that can happen is you start to read each other's minds and you start to be able to talk subliminally without actually having to say much in front of other people. And it's a great tool that's meant to empower specific, powerful groups of people who are in alignment with whatever you call the higher order, right? And it's just something natural that happens. I mean, not to get graphic, but they say like when women work together, they sync up, and like when men work together, they sync up. Everybody seems to sync up. But that's why it's so important to be very cautious and careful as to who you align yourself with. Because you don't want to pick up negative karma from other people, and you don't also want to kind of explore their shadow nature, because where you have mutual respect, you have to take other people's past with them. They come as a package. And so you have to be aware within yourself of what is a yes or a no for sure, and then be able to ask that of the other person without being too demanding, but also understand that you're going to pick up habits from the other people, right? It's an empowerment tool, unless it's used in a manipulative way, which is dogmatic or controlling, or that you have to do this and you have to adhere to this in order to be part of this group. Well, then that takes away your freedom. So with the freedom conversation, we have to really, really ask ourselves, what collective are we joining, and do they really align with everything that I'm about? Because I don't want to pick up anyone else's negative habits or any of their biases when I've cleared my own garden, right? Like I've taken all the weeds out of my own garden. I don't want to inherit yours. So how do you then pick that? And then understand that the idea of freedom is subjective. My idea of freedom is that I have the rights to make my own decisions within any group of people that I belong with, and that I don't have to adhere to someone else's understanding of what I have to do, right? That's my understanding of freedom. But when it comes to certain things, like people who get triggered by surveillance and all that stuff, I could care less if anybody's surveilling me. I'm not doing anything wrong. You know what I mean? Like, I put my secrets out there a long time ago, and now I kind of just live as best as I can, as gracefully as I can. So for me, the trigger isn't loss of freedom in that way, because I already understand that it's been happening since 9/11, and it should, by many accounts, because of the fact that, you know, we have terrorists and so forth. But the thing is, for each of us, we then have to figure out what is okay and what is not okay, and what we consider freedom. And if joining a specific group somehow starts to take away our own independence, right? That's a whole different conversation. But then we go to like science and some of the really amazing work that's being done with Neuralink and all of those amazing things that are going to be helping us walk again and to help us do all these things. you're basically signing up to be part of a network that then controls like parts of your body in order to help you. And so then you could get triggered by, well, then can like someone ever like hijack that? Like that's a really silly concern right at the moment, because I don't know enough about neuro. I like Elon Musk, so I don't really think that anybody could. But it could trigger a fear response. So then you would have to work through that response, and you would want to be around people who also share that concern without being dogmatic about it, right? Because one of the things that we're realizing as we move into this collective consciousness is that we all fit into a greater puzzle. But one of the things that we all have to do individually before we even start moving in that direction is figure out what it is that we bring to the table. What is our life purpose? Who's working on that life purpose? Who do I align with on a much bigger scale? It's not just about your partner sexually or your love interest or whatever it is. It's, well, who are you bringing into your circle, and what is it that they're working on? Can you then build something even stronger and better together? Because if you can do that, then that's the right collective consciousness. But then you have to work through, what are the freedoms that I'm losing in this partnership? Is there any? Or are there concerns that I need to address before I join up or link up, right? Those are all things. But understand that when you join a collective consciousness, if you are aware and if you're being responsible and you're practicing due diligence and you're doing your research and you're centering your energies and you're standing back enough, one of the things that you can do is when you walk in to whatever group it is, go, look, I'm an independent person. My spiritual beliefs are not for sale. My you know what I mean? I'm open to change and evolution because I'm always going to be learning. I'm a perpetual student. I never claim to know all the answers. Instead, I'm one of those people that I just study a lot. I study a lot of different faiths. I study a lot of XYZ. So I bring that to the table, and I bring a unitive approach, and my writing speaks to that, and the history is there. In fact, I'm working on something now that's going to bring that all more to the forefront. But the point is that my record is there. And then, so when the other person and I meet, or whenever group I'm going to be part of as we evolve, even if I have to start one of my own, I have to understand that there are going to be some things that I relinquish, right? For example, my area of special interest is writing, acting, and more of the creative. Probably my partners will be business oriented. And so there are things that I'm going to have to trust that they're going to do. And I'm going to have to relinquish some of my freedom in that and be like, okay, well, just let me know what it is and break it down to me so I understand it. And then if I sign off on it, we're good. So you see what I'm saying? So like there are different things that we give and take in any relationship that are give and take, right? You give certain things, you provide those services, and then someone takes those services, and then the exchange keeps going, and there's an equality to it. So you're always wanting to do that when you're looking for an outright collective that you want to be a part of. Also, I have a big thing about people who are really hateful, intolerant, or any type of spreading of evil, in my opinion, where they want to bombard people with racism or whatever it is. I immediately have no interest in them. I look at those situations in other people and who they're aligned with. And that's something that I do for myself. I'm not telling you to do that. But with me being so aware and being so about the collective consciousness, I also understand that I have to be careful of who they surround themselves with, because sometimes they may not see a pattern that's emerging with their group of friends, and it's not my place to tell them, but I don't need to be part of that energy. And so that's another layer to it as well. So as we move more into the forefront of studying our subconscious states and bringing that to the table, we're looking at things like depression, we're looking at anxiety, and we're trying to figure out what it is that those trigger points are and how we can do it. And for many of us, without medication, even though some people need the medication. So how do we walk that fine line? But all of that is going to be part of your evolution. And as you move into the understanding that the collective unconscious is now in motion towards a conscious state, so that we as a peer group can evolve out of triggering responses from fear, insecurities, hatreds, intolerances, all of the lower vibrational stuff, the more we move away from that, the more the world around us changes. But we have to be responsible for our own actions as we move into this new era. And that's really what I wanted to say with this. You know, when it's all said and done, here's what I'm going to say about the collective consciousness. There is a lot of things to be afraid of when you don't deal with your own internal nature and you don't understand why you do certain things. But the more empowered you are and the more you start to acknowledge and realize where you've made certain choices and why a lot of it is in our control, then what happens is you empower yourself to then no longer be subjected to manipulation or coercion in other ways. And so you stand for yourself, and you stand up for yourself regularly. But you don't become more intolerant, and you don't spread those things to other people. In fact, you become more compassionate and empathetic for each other. And that's where we as a species really, really want to go. Is a place where, of course, we're going to disagree. We're not carbon copies of the same all manifestation, right? Each of us is our own query, and we're here on our own lesson plan, and we're converting them to blessings, but we're then manifested individually. So each diamond is a different facet, and each one of us shines and glimmers differently. Do we complement each other is the point. Can we bring something to each other in our groupings that brings something of value to the world? Because remember, it started with just an idea. Carl Jung had one little idea, an observation that he brought to the media, or to the forefront of the media attention, which has now gained a lot of popularity. But notice the motion started the moment he identified it and verbalized it. And then suddenly all of his other attention went to that idea. And suddenly fields and specialties started to come out of that to really benefit our world. So even though it can trigger fear responses in some of us of losing some of our freedom, understand that we first have to identify what freedom means to us. And from that moment, then build out and build up, right? Because for me, a lot of things that other people are afraid of, I have absolutely no fear of. Death, for example. Okay, well, that's the end of that school year. But other people do have fears. So how can I be compassionate towards those concerns without adopting them into my reality, right? And that's what a lot of leaders should be doing, especially conscious leaders are working on this, which is how do they bring the most amount of people to the table in a way that's empathetic, but that does not take dominance and priority, right? It has to be better for the most amount of people. But you can't always just walk into something and believe that you're thinking clearly, because it might be something responding to a fear trigger that you have that makes you act in a way that's intolerant, hurtful, or hateful to other people. And you may not be aware of it because you think you're the good guy in defending whatever it is you believe so strongly in. But the thing about evolution is if you can't stand before something and not have it waver your conviction, then it was never stable to begin with. So then you have to go back to square one and rebuild it again with a newer, fresher understanding, and one that brings a lot more compassion to each other. Remember, all of us are part of the all, and all of us are experiencing the all in different ways. We're all physical manifestations all working at once. So what is it that our life purpose is? What collective consciousness are we feeding into? And do we want to take the responsibility and ownership for our own actions in order to better help other people take ownership and responsibility for their actions? And from that, how do you speak to that? Are you empathetic? Are you compassionate? Are you loving? Or are you judgmental? Because the last thing we need in a judgmental world is more judgment. And especially if you're spiritual and you believe in the return of the great king, the last thing we need is us taking that position, because that's not our task. Our task is to bring awareness to what we're manifesting as a group, and the amazing empowerment and possibilities and potentialities that exist when we are right aligned with the right people and the vibrational pull that is created from that. I mean, if you think of harmonics, is there anything prettier than seeing an orchestra work well together, each of them playing different instruments, but each of them adding to the swell of the beautiful music? That's a collective consciousness. That's a collective that is physically working in tandem, bringing each of their specialties to the world in the way that you, me, and everybody who sees this can. So who are those people? How do we align ourselves with them? And then how do we bring that joy and exuberance to the world so they can see that there's a much better way of doing things that is not based on fear, intolerance, hatred, or other lower vibrational things? Be the example. Be the person who walks forward and says, hey, I have this idea that might end world hunger. Write to it. Put content out there. It doesn't matter if anybody sees it necessarily at once. Because look at Carl Jung, a perfect example. He stated it, it grew in time. So let the momentum build, but understand that it was very, very well orchestrated, and he served as a vessel towards higher knowledge. And what happened? The swell built like the ocean, and suddenly all of us are now in much better, or we're heading towards much sturdier waters where it's not as rocky and stuff like that. Because we're understanding ourselves so innately that we can then start helping other people deal with their depression and their drug addiction and their anxiety. And all of the crosses that we've bared come with rewards. Because now when we experience those things, even if it's in other people, our compassion for them is the first driving force for us to then be able to say something to them that might make their day or that might help them, because we've been there. Remember, every lesson is found in a blessing. It's how you convert that energy that most rewards the world around you and makes you the shining star that you are. So as we work through this, just be conscious of why I keep referring to the collective consciousness, is because many of us are now aware of why we're doing the things we're doing. And in that, we're better able to assert what the motivations are to the people around us, which brings a lot more value to our circles and to who we belong with. And then better align with the people who are working in that direction. You will always win the day in that way. And that's all I wanted to say. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. I will talk to you guys later. Bye.